Right now, you have the entire sum of human knowledge sitting in your pocket. You can ask a screen any question, and in less than a second, you get an answer. Because of this, we like to think we are the smartest humans to ever live. We look back at our ancient ancestors, living in caves and mud huts, and we pity them. We assume that because their world was simple, their minds must have been simple too.
But evolutionary biologists and neuroscientists have spent the last few decades quietly uncovering a reality that is far more uncomfortable. Your brain is not bigger than an ancient human's. In fact, it is smaller. And thousands of years ago, before cities, before writing, and before the internet, the average human was forced to be vastly more intelligent, versatile, and mentally sharp than you or I will ever be.
We didn't evolve to get smarter. We evolved to outsource our intelligence. And in doing so, we traded raw individual genius for collective survival. To understand why, we have to look back roughly 30,000 years to the Upper Paleolithic era. If you were transported back to that world, your modern survival would depend on something called individual brain power. Today, you can specialize. You can be brilliant at writing code, fixing cars, or filing taxes, and rely on thousands of other people to grow your food, purify your water, build your home, and keep you alive. You only need to know one thing well to survive.
An ancient hunter-gatherer could not afford specialization. A single human in 30,000 BCE had to be a master botanist, meteorologist, structural engineer, navigator, and pharmacist, all at once. Think about what an average day required. You needed to memorize the exact medicinal properties of hundreds of local plants, knowing precisely which leaf heals an infection and which root causes cardiac arrest. You had to track animals across hundreds of miles of changing terrain based on subtle variations in crushed grass or shifted dirt. You had to predict weather patterns days in advance by reading wind direction and cloud density. You had to construct shelter, manufacture weapons out of stone and bone, and navigate vast landscapes without a map, compass, or star chart.
If you made one intellectual mistake, if your memory lapsed for a single second, you died. There was no safety net, no emergency room, no Google. Natural selection was applying relentless, brutal pressure directly to the human brain every single day.
In 2012, geneticist Dr. Gerald Crabtree at Stanford University published a fascinating hypothesis. He calculated the number of genes required for optimal human intellectual and emotional performance. His conclusion was startling. Crabtree argued that human intelligence likely peaked thousands of years ago, back when a lapse in judgment meant immediate death. He estimated that if a typical citizen from ancient Athens or a Paleolithic hunting band were suddenly placed among us today, they would be among the brightest, most emotionally balanced, and mentally flexible people in the room.
And physical evidence backs this up. Fossil records show that over the last 30,000 years, the average human brain size has actually shrunk by about 10%. That is a loss roughly the size of a tennis ball. So what happened? What caused the human brain to contract? The answer is simpler than you'd think. Agriculture and urbanization.
Around 10,000 years ago, humans invented farming. We settled down. We built towns, then cities, then empires. Agriculture brought stability, but it also changed the evolutionary math forever. For the first time in human history, an individual didn't need to be a genius to pass on their genes. A person who was intellectually average, or even below average, could survive under the protection of a larger society, fed by a surplus of crops grown by someone else. Societies allowed humans to pool their knowledge. We created division of labor. One person made shoes, another farmed wheat, another built walls. The collective intelligence of the group skyrocketed, but the demand on the individual mind collapsed. Anthropologists call this process self-domestication. Just as wild wolves have larger brains than domesticated dogs because wolves must navigate a hostile, complex world on their own, humans self-domesticated. We built a world so safe and organized that our individual brains no longer needed to maintain maximum processing power just to stay alive. We didn't become dumber because we failed. We became less individually intelligent because we succeeded. We traded the vast, hyper-adaptable mind of the ancient nomad for the safety of the collective hive. And here is the part nobody talks about. We like to measure intelligence by what we can store outside our heads. We point to supercomputers, space travel, and artificial intelligence as proof of our cognitive supremacy. But those are achievements of the species, not the individual. If you take away the infrastructure of modern civilization, how much do you actually know how to do? How much of your survival relies on your own raw problem-solving abilities? And how much relies on a network you don't even understand? Modern humans are hyper-specialized cogs in a massive global machine. Our ancestors were the machine itself. Every single individual was a complete toolkit of human survival, adaptability, and wisdom. They lived in an environment where curiosity wasn't a hobby, it was a life or death requirement. They didn't have books, so they developed extraordinary memories, capable of holding entire oral histories, navigation routes, and ecological catalogs. They didn't have clocks, so they tuned their senses to the subtle rhythms of the earth, the stars, and the animals around them. They lived with a deep, immediate awareness of their world because their minds were built to absorb everything. We traded all of that for comfort, predictability, and a phone that thinks for us. So, the next time you look at an ancient artifact, a stone arrowhead, or a cavern wall painted in the dark by firelight, don't look down on the hands that made it. The people who walked the earth tens of thousands of years ago weren't primitive rough drafts of modern humans. They were the peak of individual human capability. We didn't surpass them in brain power. We just built a world where we didn't have to be as smart as they were just to survive the night.